Welcome to Independent Aircraft Investigations. My name is Richard Godfrey. Today we're going to investigate MH370 and the unexpected diversion. How did MH370 disappear into the Indian Ocean? How is it possible for an aircraft like a Boeing 777 to simply disappear? In the modern global glasshouse of radar and satellite systems, surely someone must have tracked the aircraft. The aircraft supposedly passed within radar range of Malaysia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, Indonesia, Myanmar, and India. Questions have been raised regarding potential detection by over-the-horizon radar, underwater acoustic systems, and military radar installations. A lot of questions and very few answers. Independent aircraft investigations brings you the established facts. We provide traceability of all evidence to a source authority. We make a clear distinction between factual data and analytical interpretation. We operationalize ICAO Annex 13 by embedding investigative discipline directly into the production of each episode. This ensures factual material, analytical work, and narrative outputs remain clearly distinguished, traceable, and compliant throughout the life cycle of an investigation. Aviation news is covered on daily airline news as it happens. This channel is reserved exclusively for more in-depth investigations. If you find this analysis helpful, then you may want to watch future independent investigations, and you can do that by subscribing to this channel, which helps ensure our work continues. Let's start with an overview of what happened to MH370. The aircraft registered 9M MRO. Malaysian Airlines flight MH370 took off from Kuala Lumpur International Airport on the 7th of March 2014 at 16:42 UTC. That was 0042 local time on the 8th of March. And that is according to the Malaysian ICAO Annex 13 Safety Investigation Team report, which was issued on the 2nd of July 2018. We are told in the official report that the aircraft took off on runway 32 right and was bound for Beijing, with 239 people on board. Let's start by having a look at the flight plan. The source of this flight plan is the Department of Civil Aviation in Malaysia. And you'll see on the document FPL for flight plan and the ICAO flight code MAS 370. This was filed at 07 on March 2014 at 0444 UTC, so around 12 hours before the plane took off. And the departure is noted as WMKK, which is the ICAO code for Kuala Lumpur International Airport, and arrival expected at ZBAA, which is Beijing Capital International Airport. And in between, we have a list of waypoints, airways, flight levels, and speeds. And right at the end of the flight plan, at the bottom, the aircraft, it's noted in a remark, is fitted with an ICAO-compliant ACAS-2, an airborne collision avoidance system, version 2. and that provides traffic and resolution advisories. Let's have a look at the flight route for MAS 370 9M MRO. So the plane took off at 1642 UTC and climbed towards the first waypoint, PBOS. Captain Zahari Shah was the pilot in command, and this should have been a routine flight for him, a flight which he had done hundreds of times before, the last time on the 21st of February, just 15 days earlier. First Officer Farik Hamid was on his last training flight before fully qualifying as a first officer on the Boeing 777 type of aircraft. He had also flown this route 3 times before in 2013, but that was on an Airbus A330. The aircraft was picked up by radar as soon as it was airborne, and shortly thereafter by the ADS-B receiver at Sultan Mahmud Airport, Terengganu, on the east coast of Malaysia. The aircraft sent the takeoff report via satellite at 16:41:58 UTC, and that indicated the engine health monitoring system was working properly and everything was fine. At 16:42:48 UTC, air traffic control cancelled the standard instrument departure via waypoint PBOS and authorized a flight route direct to waypoint Igari. At 16:46:43 UTC, the first position report came through using the Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System, ACARS. That was transmitted via satellite. And independent aircraft investigations has all the ADS-B data from the Kuala Lumpur Flight Information Region for all commercial aircraft on the 7th of March for a period of 6 hours, both before and after MH370 took off. We also have all the Malaysian civilian radar data for the flight of MH370 and all the ACARS data which was sent by satellite for both the flight of MH370 as well as previous flights of the same aircraft, 9M MRO. The first clue comes from missing flight level data in the ADS-B data. There are 3,586 ADS-B data points for MH370. From just after takeoff at 16:49:37 UTC to just before waypoint Igari at 17:20:34 UTC. That's for a time frame of 30 minutes and 57 seconds. MH370 was established in the cruise at 35,000 feet, almost 20 minutes before the diversion. 2 engine health monitoring reports and 6 position reports in that 30-minute time frame, all showing everything was fine. And then, all of a sudden, no more reports via ACARS or ADS-B data or secondary radar. So, as I mentioned, the first clue is buried in the ADS-B data. In the last 2 rows of data, the flight level is missing. The reason why there is no flight level data in the last 2 rows is not because the transponder failed, because if that happened, you would simply switch from the left transponder over to the right transponder. So why is the flight level missing from the last two rows of data? If we take a look at the transponder panel, it becomes clear. The reason is not because the altitude source failed, because if that happened, you'd simply switch from normal to alternate source. The reason is when you switch the transponder to standby in the cockpit, the mode selector switch position is normally pointing at transponder, XPNDR, and to move the switch to standby, STBY, you first have to switch to alt reporting off, altitude reporting off, and then you can switch to standby. For this reason, the last two rows of data show 0 flight level, and those two data items lasted for almost 1 second. And because the altitude reporting was switched off, after that, there was no data at all, because the transponder was then switched to standby. This was not a failure of the transponder. This was a deliberate switch action in the cockpit. Let's have a look at the ACARS data. The first set of ACARS 6 position reports every 5 minutes was from 1641, 1646, 1651, 1656, 1701, and 1706. And that was sent via satellite at 1707. And at that point in time, everything was working normally. The next set of ACARS position reports at 1711 through to 1736 was not sent. The ACARS system can also be switched off in the cockpit. And the next ACARS report, expected at 1737, was not received. The aircraft was at the point of handover from the Kuala Lumpur flight information region to the Ho Chi Minh flight information region in Vietnam, but there was no radio contact. The aircraft has 5 radio systems, 2 transponders, and ACARS can communicate via satellite or via VHF. When the transponder is switched off, you also lose the traffic collision avoidance system, TCAS. So you are not only flying dark, you're flying blind. The standard procedure for a total communication failure is to continue to fly the agreed flight plan. Instead, MH370 diverted from the agreed flight plan 180 degrees in an air turnback across Malaysia. Now let's think about the radio communications. The last radio communication was at 1719 UTC, and that was 64 seconds before the transponder was switched off. Professor Hermann Kunzel from Marburg University in Germany is a forensic expert in voice analysis, and he identified the speaker of the last radio message from the cockpit as from Captain Zahari Shah. Professor Kunzel flew to Kuala Lumpur and collected recordings of all the radio communications from the aircraft. He also spoke with colleagues, family, and friends of both pilots, and a summary of his findings is in the Malaysian official report. Now I'd like to take a look at the radar coverage. The aircraft disappears from air traffic control screens, but the next clue comes from the radar coverage. The diversion occurred not only during the air traffic control handover between Malaysia and Vietnam, but also just outside the Malaysian radar coverage. There were also other aircraft in the vicinity. In fact, the ADS-B data totals 614,612 rows of data from the Kuala Lumpur Flight Information Region for all commercial aircraft for the 6-hour period on the 7th of March 2014 around the disappearance of MH370. And at the time MH370 diverted, there were 12 other aircraft in the vicinity. The nearest aircraft was a flight CES 5093, a China Eastern Airlines from Kunming in China, heading to Singapore. And SCS 5093 was 87.5 nautical miles from MH370 on a bearing of 262.7 degrees true at flight level 370. Now, MH370 had a ground speed of 470.9 knots and was on a track of 25.8 degrees true at flight level 350. And then it executed a 180-degree air turnback towards Malaysia. And SCS 5093 had a ground speed of 448.2 knots and was on a southerly track of 163 degrees true. And as I mentioned, at flight level 370, 2,000 feet higher. By the time MH370 crossed the flight path of CS 5093, there was a 15-minute separation in time. If MH370 maintained flight level 350, then a 2,000 feet vertical separation and a 112 nautical mile horizontal separation. Let's have a look at the radar coverage after the diversion. MH370 disappeared from secondary radar, but it was picked up by primary radar. But the aircraft was unidentified and unresponsive. It was detected first by the Kota Bharu Airport terminal area radar at WMKC, and it was inbound at 17:30 UTC. But no attempt at an emergency landing was made at Kota Bharu Airport, and the aircraft continued past and eventually left their radar range at 17:44. The same unidentified and unresponsive aircraft was detected by Butterworth Air Force Base terminal area radar at WMKB and inbound at 17:46 UTC. No attempt at an emergency landing was made at Penang Airport or at Butterworth Air Force Base or Langkawi Airport, all with runways over 3,000 meters long, and the aircraft continued past and eventually left radar range at 1,800 UTC. A Boeing only needs a runway length of 2,100 meters for landing. And so there are plenty of airports in the vicinity where an emergency landing could have taken place. The Malaysian official report confirms the civilian primary radar track and includes the military primary radar observations. But the military radar data has never been released. so it is not possible to confirm this evidence. The Malaysian official report states at 18:01:59 UTC, the data showed a blip on a heading of 022 degrees and a speed of 492 knots at an altitude of only 4,800 feet. And this is supported, it says, by the blip detected by military radar in the area of Pulau Perak, an island off the coast of Malaysia, again at an altitude of 4,800 feet, which is very low. And then the blip disappeared and it reappeared a few minutes later at 18:15 UTC. And it lasted until 18:22. By that time, 195 nautical miles from Butterworth Air Force Base on a heading of 285 and a speed of 516 knots, and meanwhile an altitude of 29,500 feet. The military radar data is not independently verified, and the Australian Defence Science and Technology Group, DSTG, decided to take the last known position from the primary radar data that they were given at 18:01. That comes from the DSTG report, Bayesian methods in the search for MH370. Let's have a look at the track across Malaysia to the Malacca Strait. There is an independent verification of the civilian primary radar detection of MH370 at 17:52:27 UTC as the aircraft passes Penang Island. The Malaysian official report states the first officer's mobile phone had a single signal hit, which was picked up at a base station at Bandar Baru Falim on Penang Island. And IAI has verified the mobile tower location and the mobile data received. If we accept the civilian primary radar data, the next question, which then arises, is what was the track of MH370 after the last confirmed primary radar trace? Let's have a look at the Inmarsat satellite data. At 18:25:27 UTC, the satellite data unit was rebooted in the aircraft. The flight number MH370 was not entered into the system, but the stream of satellite messages all contain the ICAO identifier for 9M MRO and show the hex code 75008F. A total of 178 satellite data messages were sent and received, including 2 unanswered satellite phone calls. Every message had the ICAO identifier 75008F. And IAI has the Inmarsat satellite data logs from the Société Internationale de Télécommunications Aéronautique, CETA, for 9M MRO for the flight on the 7th of March, and also for a number of the previous flights. So let's just recap what has happened while MH370 went effectively dark. It went dark in 12 steps, starting at 17:07:29 UTC with the last ACARS message. At 1843 UTC, MH370 left the Kuala Lumpur flight information region and headed south into the Indian Ocean. 1 hour, 35 minutes and 31 seconds after the last ACARS message, MH370 headed off into the Indian Ocean direction. And that's 1 hour, 23 minutes after the last radio message, 1 hour, 22 minutes after the last ATC secondary radar data, 1 hour, 22 minutes after the last ADS-B data. We had an unidentified and unresponsive aircraft flying back towards Malaysia, and nobody intervenes. Why? We are told because it was a friendly aircraft. The Malaysian official report states, therefore, the military did not pursue to intercept the aircraft since it was friendly and did not pose any threat to national airspace security, integrity, and sovereignty. This statement is repeated 3 times in the 1,423-page report. How did Malaysia know it was friendly? Under post-9/11 ICAO assumptions, an unidentified and unresponsive aircraft constitutes a potential security risk until positively identified. The Malaysian official report uses a circular argument. We did not intercept because it was friendly, and we know it was friendly because we did not intercept it. An unidentified and unresponsive aircraft cannot simultaneously be friendly. There is a standard ICAO procedure on how to deal with an unidentified and unresponsive aircraft, and that standard procedure was not followed. Under Annex 2, Chapter 3, an aircraft is considered unidentified and unresponsive when the identity cannot be established and there is no two-way communication with ATC, and it does not correlate with a known flight plan. At the time of disappearance of MH370, Hishmuddin Hussain held 2 government roles. He was both the Minister of Defense and the Minister of Transport. And this dual role is highly unusual in ICAO terms because the Transport Minister is responsible for ICAO compliance and for civil aviation. The Defense Minister is responsible for interception and air sovereignty. The official public statement was political, not procedural. It relied on retrospective intent attribution. It avoided ICAO terminology, any ICAO thresholds, and the ICAO procedure and documentation. And it did not resolve the contradiction between unidentified on one hand and friendly on the other. It effectively closed the issue without answering it. As a result, the same individual was publicly defending both sides of a civil-military failure, eliminating independent accountability between the 2 systems. Before 9/11, hijackings were assumed to be negotiation events. Time was seen as an ally. Unresponsive aircraft were often treated as just technical problems. But after 9/11, time is treated as a threat. A civilian aircraft can be used as a weapon, and silence and deviation just amplify the risk, and they are not neutral facts. In the next episode, we will continue tracking aircraft 9M MRO over the Indian Ocean and examining the available data and the inferred flight path. Please leave any comments or questions you may have. We will address the key points in our next episode and publish responses on our website, www.mh370search.com. Thank you very much for watching, and please subscribe for future investigations.